All right, so after reviewing a lot of the historic cases, and of course, as I mentioned, those aren't all of them. There are plenty, and people see things all the time. Some of them, unfortunately, people just don't share. And I think it's good that we have a supportive network of people here in this community that allow for others to feel like they have a kind of a way to come out and share about something otherwise that maybe family and friends might be ridiculing of. So it's a difficult situation, and sometimes it's what inadvertently brings people into this area of interest is something that they never planned on happening. A lot of people go out and they really try to see what they can find. They go out sky watching and see if they can find UFOs, and most people that see them never try to even go out looking. They just happen to see something. So there's a lot of really interesting things that brings people into this community. It's a field of study, but it's also a subculture. There's a lot of mixtures of things that help to kind of generate interest, and I'm going to be sharing about some of those things I've noticed over some of the time I've spent. You know, where we left off around 2008 with the Stephenville incident that Ken here was sharing about with us, I think it's kind of pivotal for my personal interest because at the time that's something that I was hearing in the news, and the next year after that, and you know, following I guess into the next year, I got interested in seeing what kind of people were in the area that knew about any of these types of things, and that's when I met Ken in 2010, and I was asking some people here if they knew anything about that, the Stephenville UFO, and they're like, oh yeah, we were all part of that whole situation just a few years ago. So I found myself in pretty interesting company, and that connected me with other individuals and all of these different things to find out about a number of different types of research going on. So from about that time, 2011 to 13, we had a lot of meetings here in this building with a lot of people, and I continued in 2014. That's kind of where I'm going to start the time frame. I'm going to run through a lot of information. It's really going to lead up to what's happening today, and a lot of what we talked about before. Just keep that in mind and see how it's kind of relevant to what the things are that we're seeing in the news and media, what the government's coming out with, and what people, civilians, are also sharing on social media and things like this as well. To go over a few things, I think Tom actually mentioned quite a few good details earlier that I think is important for anyone who's interested in this subject to learn about. That ufology is a very encompassing area of interest and study. You deal not only with unidentified flying objects, of course. Now the terms UAP come up a lot throughout the years, but now it's something the government uses more and more. But you also deal with the ideas of aliens, extraterrestrials, or non-human intelligence, and other issues. If there's something like an ancient component to this in our history, or where the government and military kind of fall into place also with technology and how that's affecting engineering capabilities. And there's a lot to it, right? To go over a few of the other details, I think it's important that we can see that there's a lot of ways to ascertain data or gain information to gather resources. A lot of investigative techniques. I approach a lot of this by way of studying it through cultural anthropology. So as interesting as the phenomenon, the UFO phenomenon or any type of unexplained phenomena is, I think the community of people involved with those studies is also very interesting and should be studied as well. A lot of interesting ideas. I mentioned some of these. Also, you hear the term close encounters a lot. So what I focus on is trying to build an ethnography, which is a cultural study, and seeing all the different outlooks, the beliefs, the opinions, the practices, the things that people do in these groups or societies that help to kind of give them a sense of their reality, depending on whatever it is they're dealing with. In this case, for UFOs, there's a lot happening. People that are not only seeing objects, but they're interacting with something that is usually interpreted as non-human, whether they interpret it as alien or something else, or more spiritual. There's a lot of components here. And then the documentation of it through literature is extensive as well. But dealing with close encounters, that's something a lot of people probably know this subject more so by because of J. Allen Hynek, who came up with this Hynek scale, as we call it now, which is the close encounters of the first, second, and third kind. There I am with his son, Paul Hynek. Dr. J. Allen Hynek is no longer living, but he started a number of things after he was involved with Project Blue Book, which he investigated UFOs for with the Air Force back in the 50s and 60s. He went on to start the Center for UFO Studies and really look into it. If you've ever heard of the term swamp gas, he's why. And of course, he changed his mind later about the seriousness of the subject and showed that there is a lot to it and we should be looking into it. But Paul is actually kind of not really much of a protege of his work necessarily, but a promoter of the awareness of the subject and its various components as well. When it comes to the close encounter scale, there's a lot going on that has been added. The first is just a sighting, to put it simply. The second is like a physical effect, like we talked about earlier. The third is when you observe or interact with some kind of occupant, or something like what we talked about earlier, where people are seeing bodies. And that's adds a whole other layer of complication, I think, sometimes, but it's been expanded upon. The fourth kind is like an abduction, whereas the fifth kind is human initiated, and people will still add numbers, but Hynek didn't originally come up with those. Those have been altered after the fact. There is plenty of ways to obtain data when it comes to this. Some people think that there's no hard evidence, but I mean, there's a lot you can do to record things, just like Kim was talking about with people, photographs, videos, radar returns. There's a lot out there by way of hard physical evidence. And of course, if there are physical craft, then they are somewhere. Someone has them. If they're earthbound or wherever, they're somewhere we can probably locate if someone's got them. There's a lot going on. So when it comes to a lot of these ideas, my original interest stemmed from that time when I got involved. Later on, I had a study group, and then 2015, there's my band again. Okay, so this is actually a photo from Del Rio, where I mentioned that one instance was supposed to have taken place. They had a festival in 2015, which is pretty cool. I got to perform there, and there was a number of other presenters as well. So they had an interesting situation there to kind of commemorate the idea of a UFO crash. And the following few months, I met up with Michio Kaku. He's a spokesperson for the Science Channel. He, at the time, was giving a lecture at UTA over here in Arlington, and he kind of playfully said, "No, we don't have any UFOs in a hangar that we've reverse engineered or anything like that." Of course, I think he's just kind of speaking in lighthearted fashion, but really, he's kind of come full circle with a lot of this, saying if the government has UFOs, we need to give it to the scientists and all this. So, interesting figure in the things that have been said when it comes to science. Here in Texas, we also had, near Austin and Bastrop, we had the Secret Space Program Conference. A few notable people there, Linda Moulton Howe, Joseph P. Farrell, and that was kind of an interesting situation because back then they were talking about the secret space program a lot. It was something that it was kind of a buzzword for a few years at that point, and they were trying to really dig into it at that conference. The following year, I went out to that crash site with Noe Torres, Ruben Uriarte, and Gary Holloway and his father to do a drone video of that area to see if they could figure out where that Colonel Robert Willingham claimed this crash took place, if it did actually take place. So I think it's important, whether you believe it or you don't believe it, if you can go to a place to investigate and get hands-on experience with something that's tangible, I think that's ideal, or do the next best thing. So I don't know that this happened or not, but there are some things that have come forward since then that make us wonder, is there more to it? This is the aerial footage that we got, and in proximity to where they think this all actually happened. And they also say that it was retrieved, so that someone came over and got it all, and however they did, took it back over to the U.S. side, took it to maybe White Sands or something. But, there's a lot of interesting ideas of crash retrieval, so this is one that I got to go out to. Now, Aurora, at the time, changed their city logo to include this iconic windmill and flying saucer look for their story, and they had an event that year as well, since 2016. The following year, they erected a monument, which you can go still see today. It's got the sign with the stylized logo and a spaceship with a windmill, and there's Ned, who's the sort of town mascot for a while. So it's cool that they got a monument, and that's, as far as I know, is still out there. In 2017, most of us probably all heard on the news about this object here, which this is not a real photo. This is a rendition of what they call a Oumuamua. How many people heard about that on the news when it came out? Probably most of us, right? Well, this guy here, Dr. Avi Loeb, claimed that he thought it was technology and that it wasn't just just debris or junk traveling through. He got a lot of flack for that, but he came out and has been hard pressed on that ever since back in 2017. It's now kind of an interesting issue now. He's been saying that they're looking for interstellar objects. He thinks it's a mothership. At the same time, later that year, Leslie Kean and a few other authors wrote for the New York Times about ATIP. ATIP is the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which was the government's UFO investigation program, apparently ran by this guy, Lou Elizondo, and was only around for a few years as far as their sharing. And so that broke the news, and that brought on a whole new wave of people's interest in this whole subject. And so, that's a kind of a pillar with many people for their arrival to this community, but obviously people have been interested in learning about this stuff for many decades before this, but this is kind of a big recent thing going on. I'm going to fly through a bunch of stuff. The next year in 2018, I held a meetup in Aurora, and this lawyer from Dallas named Stratton Horace offered a reward for the original headstone, that one we were talking about that went missing. He's offering $10,000 for anyone that knows anything of the whereabouts to that headstone, which I thought was pretty substantial. Interesting that he would do that. Also, because there's a lot of government stuff, in 2018, Texas Congressman at the time, Lamar Smith, tried to get funding of like $10 million to help with SETI. And some people, think differently about SETI, but they're in this whole thing with what they're doing. So it's interesting to see, helping on that front. On Coast to Coast AM, many of us probably heard the radio show for many years. Dr. Eric Davis basically was asked by George Knapp what he thought about crash retrievals, and he said, well, Roswell and probably Del Rio. A lot of people didn't know what Del Rio meant, but he's talking about the one that was, the place that we went to. And if what's interesting is that if that really did happen, basically someone knows about it, whether the military has it or a privatized corporation has it. There's a lot of really curious things that happen. Few of us here actually got to go. The Dallas Library asked to hold the UFO disclosure panel, so we got to do that a few years back. In 2019, there's a whole lot going on here with what happened with what I did. But just to put it simply, I did a lot of interviews with the Nimitz battle group crew, and none of the pilots, but a lot of these guys who were part of the battle group, the Princeton and the Nimitz, about their encounter or what they knew about the Tic Tac UFO as they were incidents to that. So a lot of people ask about what were the Tic Tacs. Well, this is fun because I thought this was kind of a cool thing. A friend of mine had these mints that were in a Lockheed Martin box, and it kind of made me think they have their own Tic Tacs, right? And I work over in Fort Worth, so I see these people with their shirts and stuff all the time, and I ask them, I'm like, this is really interesting, can I take a picture of your shirt? So they're like, cool. But yeah, if Skunk Works is really, or whatever, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, whoever is working on these secretive aerospace projects, they're not beholden to the same FOIA requests and things that the military and government are, so it makes us wonder what they really know. Is there something that they have that does defy what we seem to think of as like conventional physics? I also went to Area 51, not inside, of course, just the gate, and I interviewed George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell about that at that time. Just a few other things. I went and, to the original site of Travis Walton's abduction experience, his alleged experience that was made into the movie Fire in the Sky. Really interesting. A lot of people think he's the real deal. I've met him on a number of occasions and spent some time with him. I don't know myself, but he gets a lot of notoriety for coming forward after an experience that dealt with what he thought was something that ended his life, and he was brought back. So if you've never seen the movie Fire in the Sky, it's highly dramatized. It's not exactly the same. Unfortunately, Stan Friedman passed away that year. The museum held a memorial for him, which is pretty cool. So I got to meet him a few years back. We had Alien Con here in Dallas. I was on some panels. Next year, this is really interesting. So this is when the Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force was put into place in 2020. It was all over the news. In 2021, there were a lot of things going on. I got to do this Spectrum News interview. I think this should play when I click it. Let me try to see if it'll go here. This is a clip that I did, and it's a little bit dated now, of course, but this was Spectrum News wanting to do a report for what was about to be the Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Preliminary Assessment that came out in June of 2021. Let me see if it'll... Maybe.
It might be opening if you escape out.
Yeah, let me check.
Sure.
Yeah, it is. All right. Well, if if I can't get the volume, I'll just skip over this part, but let me see if I can check really quick. Yeah, no idea what he's doing that. Anyway, I'll just skip over this part here. So I'll probably have to check the volume here in a moment for this other thing, but don't have to really play this one right now. We'll get back to all right. So basically in the report, I basically say that it's very possible that the government could be in possession of some unknown or exotic technologies or non-human intelligence, and that places like Aurora give us an indication that it's possible this has happened before, but also, you know, that it could still be happening, and if it does happen in the future, we need to be ready for something like that. Later that year in the summer, this came out, which is a report. I did an analysis with my buddy Danny Silva of Silva Record. He came here, he did a presentation a few years back. A few of us were also asked to go give a talk in Dallas on it as well. Also in 2021, there was a National Press Club conference with Robert Solis, who basically gave his testimony about his time at Malmstrom Air Force Base, where an object came over and tampered with nuclear components, which got a lot of attention. He's a big advocate for UFOs being, interested in nuclear technology. So I thought that was really interesting that he got to go and do that. The following year, a lot of really interesting stuff. Basically, Rice University down in Houston held their first Archives of the Impossible, which was kind of an opening into the fringe topics in contemporary academics. So Jeffrey Kreipel, the head of their theology department, invited a number of people: Jacques Vallée, Diana Pasolka, Whitley Strieber, who used to live in San Antonio, actually all came out and have donated to the archives that they have there now in Rice University that are dedicated to the unexplained, not just UFOs, but that was a big theme this year. That's pretty cool. Also in July, the AARO, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, was founded. So if you're ever hearing stuff about that, that's when that was really kind of officially made. Also in 2022, interestingly enough, I don't know if you guys ever followed Corey Good's whole escapade, but he had a deposition that was released where he basically said that all of his stories and all his claims were just made up for the purposes of creating his own Bible. So sorry to disappoint anyone who was like really on the train for Corey Good. I think that was one of the things a lot of people were really into with the secret space program and all that, but he came out and basically said that it was all fabricated, which was not surprising to a lot of people. But later that year, this interesting logo appears on the ODNI. You have this saucer. It was like maybe some people thought a prank that happened. and then they removed it soon after. So it's interesting to see, you've got all these things, and some people were curious about this delta shape up here too, but it was like an official logo, and some people thought it might be a prank. Another really cool thing going on now, but that started up closer to the end of 2022, the National UFO Historic Records Center, founded by this guy, David Marler, is now like hosting probably the largest record of files on UFOs. And then we held the first ever Texas UFO Con. I've got one of the posters over here. Pretty cool event we did in East Texas over in Jefferson. Getting a little bit closer to our time frame. One of the things that changed, a lot of people were wondering about, UAP was aerial, and now they're referring to it since the end of 2022 as anomalous. Aerial is still a part of it, but they're referring to it as unidentified anomalous phenomena. And of course, the beginning of last year, we finally got this report that was due like over a month before that basically showed a few new reports, and it was a big letdown for a lot of people because it said that there were, at least in the reports that they had, there was no real indication that UFOs caused any effects, harmful effects on anyone, which we know is not the case from what we were talking about earlier with like Cash Landrum and all these things, but they were probably referring to only the reports that they had access to. Ancient Aliens is touring live. I don't know if you guys got to go see them here, and they were in Grand Prairie, but they are still on the road, so it's another way that people go and are keeping up with some of the stuff that they share about. This last year was really wild. Basically, a ton of stuff going on. There it is. I'm trying to go. And of course, a lot of people probably remember the whole balloon escapade. There was the Chinese balloon, and there was another Alaska object that was shot down. MUFON talked about this in the journal. There's a lot of other interesting things that were happening, but both Biden and then Trudeau ordered things to be shot down out of the sky and then potentially recovered. So we don't really know much. I don't know if anyone's heard like what's happened with any of that stuff, but I don't think much has ever been shared about what was going on, other than it was like a civilian research balloon and all this. Archives of the Impossible got together again, and they had Ray Hernandez, who was part of FREE, which is also Edgar Mitchell's group, Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences, but he's also part of this Consciousness and Contact Research Institute. They did a medical study and for free down there, and they had thousands of people, I think some 4,000 people, to show that encounters with non-human intelligence is very common, but not also always very negative. A lot of people had positive experiences, so interesting studies. Earlier last year, Dr. Avi Loeb, who I mentioned earlier, also now the head of AERO, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, co-authored a paper called The Physical Constraints on Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. They talked about how they thought objects like Oumuamua were actually giant ships brought to send probes that were AI, basically, like self-replicating to go and scour the galaxy and all this and come here. This is pretty cool. I don't think he's here today, but Billy Hallman, he used to come to our meetings a lot, and he actually posted that he saw something when he went with his family to go view the Marfa lights. Not only did they see the lights, but they saw a UFO also. So pretty interesting. In April, of course, we had this really interesting situation, talk about the budget of AERO, and one of the things that they found is that just they don't have funding, and there were a lot of excuses. People were kind of upset about that. And of course, and I was doing some interviews in May about that time, and then this big article came out, which like blew up. It went viral. How many of you guys watched anything on when David Grush came out? Most people. Good. Okay, that's good, because this is kind of where this is leading. So this article came out first on the debrief by Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kane, who I showed earlier, and then it hit on News Nation a few days later. I was at an event when that article dropped, and there were some people there who were part of that, the debrief team, and there was a whole press conference, and it was a huge ordeal. Now, I'm not going to play this clip or anything, but I would recommend, if you want to watch the beginning of his involvement, watch this News Nation clip. Basically, this guy came forward saying that he's an intelligence community member, very high ranking and security clearance, and became aware of a crash retrieval program to reverse engineer non-human technology, along with what he called non-human biologics. So later on, there's a lot happening. Just a day later, Stephen Greer held what he was calling the Disclosure Project 2.0 in the National Press Club, which shared a lot about other really strange UFO cases. So for those who follow along with Stephen Greer, that's something he did last year. I wrote an article with two scientists who I interviewed, Dr. Avi Loeb and then Dr. Seth Shostak at SETI, about what their response would be if in the event the government or military came forward in admittance of having knowledge and are looking to share about it, if they would be willing to help. And they said yes, if there is something to it. At the time, Avi Loeb was actually just getting ready to go explore out into the Pacific Ocean to look for debris from an interstellar object that had crashed there in 2014. He was very seriously contemplating that it was some kind of technology. And so they studied that. They found these spherules and all of these little things that they are wondering if it's really metal technology or it's debris or junk. So I interviewed him about that, and it came out in June. Later, in the kind of end of June there, Chuck Zukowski and a few others went out and found some debris in the debris field, the crash site there in Roswell, and they're still finding stuff out there today. We had an event, my buddy Chase over here, we were a part of this event over in Roswell. I hosted the Roswell Daily Records event out there, and we had a lot of great people. One of the virtual members we had was Congressman Tim Burchett, who was generous enough to talk with us. He impressively, to my knowledge, he knew about Aurora without being prompted. He was telling us about the meeting in Congress that was going to take place over a month later, or at least the next month. So another cool thing I just found out, like almost right as it happened, was that Stephenville threw together this thing called ET Festival, which was like a little merchants type event. I think they're going to try to get this going a little bit more regularly, so keep that in mind. It's cool to see like a place which this had been like, probably not really welcomed, is now they're trying to commercialize it a little bit and bring in tourists, I guess, or who knows. But look out for the ET Festival there in Stephenville maybe later this year. There I'm with Chase and my brother Matthew. And of course, most people might know in July on the 26th, we had this subcommittee hearing on UAP, and this is where we had Ryan Graves, David Grush, and David Fravor all come and testify to give their testimony, basically. Now, Graves and Fravor are pilots and are witnesses to some phenomenon, and possibly Grush as well. He's been very cryptic about his what he divulges, but basically they told about. So Ryan Graves is a aerospace safety for pilots and things like this. This organization which is trying to help for pilots. He's got this going on. He founded that year. And you might all know about the Tic Tac. Well, Fravor's one of the pilots of the F-18 Hornet who was engaged with it. Grush here is the guy who just came forward just not too long before that. So this was a pretty significant moment in Congress last year. At the same time, later that day, they said they need data-centric retrieval for information. So Enigma Labs, which is kind of an up-and-coming group, opened up this app so you can report UFOs and then they can acquire that. A few weeks later, I hosted their event down there in Edinburgh, which the city council and mayor came out, and I got to ask them what their thoughts were on the whole congressional hearings and how that might trickle down to local law and communities and things. So they were glad to kind of continue the festival, and there's another one coming up this year as well. The Soul Foundation got launched by Dr. Gary Nolan, so you can probably have seen him from many other things. They're looking to do a lot of work to connect science and then government. So Soul Foundations just got started. We held the second annual Texas UFO Con back in August as well. Cool event. They might do it again this year. And most of you probably have heard about the mummies. How many of you guys heard about the so-called alien mummies, right? Well, I'm not going to say they're real or not real. I don't know. I've never seen one. But there's a lot of controversy surrounding them. I have met the guy who's kind of parading them around, Jaime Maussan, who also gets a lot of flack because he shares a lot of controversial things and things that might be faked. So people are very curious. They're very frustrated with this because the idea of what they did makes sense. If you're going to come and say your government has aliens, it's hard to not come with anything. At least they had something to show. Whether they're real or not, is another discussion. But they showed something, and it's gotten a lot of traction. The next day, NASA held they released their study on UAP, and it just said there's no evidence. You can't find any evidence of ET. Conveniently, the next day. Now, I wanted to bring attention to this because I thought this is pretty cool. Here in Grapevine, Ken put together an event called "We Are Not Alone in the Universe." It's really awesome. There was a lot of really good speakers. One of them here was Nick Redfern. Nick had been an oncoming speaker here for several years. I think that he's
25 or 30.
Yeah, he had talked here, like in this building, dozens of times. And why I'm mentioning this is because, and I had to kind of keep the lid tight on this for a long time up until earlier this month. But Nick, who all has met Nick before? Do you guys get to see him? So that's awesome because Nick moved back to the UK at the end of last year to be with his dad.
He has health problems.
So yeah, I don't know if he's going to come back at all, but he wanted to quietly go and be with his dad. He lives in England, which is where he's originally from. And his dad is why he's involved with any of this. He was part of the Air Force.
90 years old and as spry as you, practically.
Yeah, and
still chasing women.
So I'm glad to see he's spending time with him now. But I just want to make mention this was his last speaking appearance here, not just in Texas, but like here overall. And I thought it was great that it was like a reunion, and in many ways. So, and I think the videos, you've got the videos for the talks and everything.
Yes.
For those, if you guys want to check them out.
I think that's on the UAMN TV YouTube channel, as well as my Stephenville presentation.
Cool, yeah, and then the Soul Foundation held a symposium. It was kind of a select invite-only event. Another really cool incident with the National UFO Historic Research Center, David Marler got the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization files, some of the oldest stuff out there that has been collected. He's got them now. He's just got probably years of work ahead of him, but that's another really good archive. The Air Force gave the University of El Paso $5 million to search for space junk, so we'll see if they come across anything. That's curious. The SCU, Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, is releasing a lot of material, and Robert Powell, who used to be part of MUFON, is now one of their members, so they're releasing stuff as well. New Fork, National UFO Reporting Center, has an interactive map on their website. At the end of last year, President Biden signed the NDAA, which is a big thing, but within it, there was an amendment made that all information about UFOs within the National Archives get consolidated and can be collected. So because Biden signed this, now there's a collection point for UAP or UFO material in the U.S. National Archives. So interesting to go into 2024 now. This is kind of what Tom was saying earlier. MUFON just announced this Project Aquarius, which is another online database full of UFO material. There are different memberships. My buddy Christopher Jordan designed this logo there. It's pretty cool. And then this is where things kind of blown up. 2024 has been a weird year for a lot of things so far, but UFOs for sure. How many of you guys watched the TMZ special? Okay, so maybe not enough. TMZ is pretty wild, with what they do, but and I'm not advocating by saying go watch it, but it's important to stay up to date and to pay attention to what is being shared. There's some interesting things on that one. And of course, that's where we have this whole jellyfish UAP UFO thing. I've met with Jeremy over the years, and he released the full footage of this object, which was seen in that TMZ special, where people had wondered what it was. It's all over the internet now. So I'm guessing all of you guys have probably seen the jellyfish thing. Now, I did a poll like maybe a week ago on our Facebook page to see what would people, respond to. The number one thing is, and this is like 150 people said, I asked what they thought it was. What is the most likely explanation? They say 150 people said ET or alien being or technology. Next to that, about 125 people said balloons, trash, or mundane object. And you have all these other small, percentages of people saying camera, lens artifacts, it's smoke, it's fake, it's meteorological.
I said it's an imperial probe droid.
That's on there. And then someone said disinformation campaign, undocumented flying jellyfish. Someone said interdimensional probes, swamp gas, an acid flashback, a drone with desert camouflage. It's the flying spaghetti monster. Don't know, need more information. So a lot of interesting things. It's like an amorphous, nondescript shape. It's hard to really know. It's also not a lot of help because it's not a definitive object, and we don't really know. And I don't know there's a way we can know what this is unless we have super technology. And all the people doing AI enhancing on this is not helping. It's not something I think you can get more information out of distorting the image further. So it's just a curious thing that came up. It's been making the rounds. I just wanted to mention that. And then in the last few days, the House committee had a classified briefing or hearing on UAP, and they had a news segment where they came out, and a lot of the members from, it's bipartisan, so there's Democrat, there's Republican. A lot of people are interested in this because it transcends sides, basically. And so a lot of people came in because they wanted to get Grush and his information in, and they talked to inspector generals and basically found out that there are a lot of things that they couldn't identify specifically that they need further hearings on. So I would play this video, but it's accessible on News Nation, and for sake of time, I'm just going to kind of wrap up with some stuff here. Just the other day, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, after leaving Arrow, published his editorial, his opinion piece. Basically says that he found no ET evidence, and a lot of people are very upset at that. And there's some reason to be probably, but you can see that on Scientific American. Diana Pasolka was on Joe Rogan with an interesting kind of series of discussions they had just the other day. Now, I don't know if I can play this one, but also, interestingly, last night, I don't know if you guys know Chris Bledsoe, but he's gotten a lot of notoriety. He posts regularly on our group. He's not in Texas, but he's willing to share some of the things he sees. But he was just posting this last night, and I thought I'd put it on here. It's a video, and he just sees these orbs moving around. He always has this happen. He's got an interesting story. But if you want to check that out, it's on our group on there. Now, to wrap things up, there's a lot of talk about non-human intelligence, what that means. Is it really just aliens? Is it something else? Is it spiritual? Is it something, what some people would say, crypto-terrestrial or ultra-terrestrial? John Keel would talk about these ideas a lot, where they're not just beings from other planets, but could be someone here from another dimension or something. So interdimensional has been tossed around a lot in the media, which is interesting. One thing I want to mention for the mummies, for the sake of why it's important that we glean information from previous instances where we have claims of retrieved biological materials. In this case, you guys have probably all heard about the Star Child skull. I got to check it out a few years back. And this was touted around by a few people. Lloyd Pye, for instance, would say that this was an alien hybrid. More recent medical studies had shown Melanie Young owns it. Chase Klutsky and some other people had done some studies on it, and they determined that it was in no way alien at all. It was Mesoamerican, and it was unfortunately had something like progeria. But it's important to realize that in other instances we see similarities in the studies' conclusions, where something like the Atacama skeleton, a lot of people said, and this is also prompted by people like Stephen Greer, they said that this is not human. And then other studies came out by like Dr. Gary Nolan saying that it is human. So there's still controversy with findings we already have. So throwing the mummy situation into the mix it kind of complicates it even more, but it just goes to show that even if these aren't alien, we can still learn from them by way of medical research and technology and genetics and things like that. So there's a lot that we already have that's been circulating for a while. People ask about the mutations, cattle mutations, animal mutations, human mutilations, not mutations. And all I'll just say, because there's some things to keep up with on the news, but Christopher O'Brien wrote Stalking the Herd, and of course, Linda Moulton Howe wrote Alien Harvest, and these go years back, but this is a phenomenon that's gotten a lot of attention over the years. It's hard to relate it directly to UFOs, but there could be some connection between what people think is going on. Also, people throw flack at ancient aliens and all this. I think that the media side of this, the whole spoke of this community, with something like ancient aliens and these guys and their whole, their ilk, I would say that it's really important to keep in mind that these shows do a better job of reaching more people than conferences or books, and they ask questions. They're not necessarily claiming facts, and I think people misinterpret that. Giorgio is very open about a lot of the stuff that he talks about as and being inquisitive, not necessarily stating fact. And that's the whole point of Eric von Daniken's book, Chariot of the Gods, is that they're all questions. So I think that it generates curiosity, it generates and promotes social awareness. And then people from there can go, if they really want to pick it up more than just a surface level enthusiast, you can take it from there. People ask about time travelers. This guy, professor of anthropology, Michael Masters, has written a book on identified flying objects. He considers that these are time travelers from the future, which is interesting. Abductions, are these happening? I think that a lot of people are curious if there's harm or negative interactions. I've interviewed a lot of people who claim different things. I was fortunate to talk with this guy, Calvin Parker, who was one of two people, Charles Hickson as well, who had passed away a long time ago, but they had an incident that took place in 1973 in Pascagoula, Mississippi, where he claimed these strange robotic-like beings took him and his buddy aboard a craft and they were abducted. And unfortunately, he passed away recently, but his legacy will live on in this story that's been well documented now for many years. Very incredible case, the Pascagoula, Mississippi incident. What about CE5? People ask about, what this is supposed to be. I did a conference call with Stephen Greer a few years ago. We're at a local CE5 DFW group, and I didn't know this was going to happen, but he came up on the screen and was asking people, how it was going, and so I took the opportunity to ask him a question. But people ask what CE5 is. That's Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. Basically, it's human-initiated contact. People are trying to do what they can to elicit a response from something beyond. There are groups and chapters. There's the app. There are protocols. Some people do it by the book. Some people do it kind of how they want. But this guy used to actually, Joseph Burks worked with Greer, but he's doing his own thing now. He came up with this term HICE, which is human-initiated contact. And he says it's not, the modality issue is kind of just many ways in which people can try to do this, but CE5 is one of them. HICE is kind of the overall process of trying to communicate with something non-human. And then what about native wisdom? There's a lot of really interesting things about what people like Clifford Mahudi talked about with star people and ancient traditions and the Kachinas and all of this. Unfortunately, he passed away about 2 years ago. So, it's important that we keep this information intact. So there are resources out there, in addition to the ones that I've already mentioned, groups like CIRO, the Close Encounter Research Organization, Opus, Les Velez, who's local now. He actually has an organization, the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support, helps with those who are trying to find a better understanding or connecting with people. UAP Med is now, something that people can look into as well. And just for future reference, for events and things, to keep up with things coming up, if you want to get involved with going to something and seeing people, talking with people, the Edinburgh event is coming up. It's in South Texas. It's the 13th annual one. It's in April, as well as the Ozark Mountain Conference that was founded by Dolores Cannon. That's in April as well. You've got the SCU conference coming up in June. It's at the same time as Contact in the Desert, which is having its 10-year anniversary. And then, of course, Roswell is going to have its festival in July. And then right after that, we're going to have the MUFON Symposium, which is here. It's in the area, so you guys probably should keep track of that one for sure. If there's any one of these that can make, try to aim for that one. And overall, I would just say some considerations would be that what I found in my ethnographic research of this is that a lot of these different groups who attempt to investigate these interactions or encounters are doing similar things. Maybe not deliberately or maybe not exactly verbatim, but the process itself, an attempt to elicit a response from something non-human, whether they perceive it as paranormal, alien or extraterrestrial, spiritual, whether they perceive it as cryptid or whatever it is, there are little connections, I think, that can be inferred between these types of things. So I think it's important to keep these ideas in mind when we move forward into investigating this further. Media coverage, what the government and military is saying, what science and academia are saying, how infotainment, the shows, the media, all of that, and what events can do to generate social awareness, the anthropological implications, this idea of disclosure. I think it's subjective, everyone's got a different view, or what contact is, and how we can move forward into this field with a better understanding and maybe framework, not just from the government saying that we have or don't have, but as a community overall with civilians, scientists, military and government all together, as a working apparatus. I think there's a lot of information that's being presented, and I think it's good to pay attention and not to just believe one thing or another or to take people's words. I think Tom mentioned earlier it's important to, look at this objectively and maybe if, I would say scientifically, because there's a lot that you can get caught up in. I mean, I'll just say, it's all this stuff and more. You can check out the Texas UFO Network. It's really been fascinating to kind of follow along with a few years of this research, and I'm glad to kind of connect with others who are interested as well. My upcoming things that I'm doing, my projects, I have a cultural history project on Aurora, and then I also am putting together this collection of ethnography research as well, and then you can see some of the videos and media content I have on the Vortex. So I want to say thanks to Tom and Ken, of course, and John and everybody here to make sure you're taking the time to involve yourself into something. I think it's important. So I want to just say thanks for that, and I appreciate the time, and thanks, guys. So appreciate it.